What's up, StuMo? Like Matt said, my name's Alex. I'm pumped to be here with you guys tonight. Lots of familiar faces in the room. It's so good to see you. Lots of new faces as well. And I am just pumped to be here with y'all. Here's my family. Yep. Yeah, that's my wife, Megan, and Millie. Wes isn't visible in this picture, but he's in there. And that's Wesley. Yeah, Millie and Wesley, they're my two kids. Millie's almost 3. Wes is just 7 months now. They are just so much fun. Millie has no fear. She is so good at gymnastics. They're actually in the back right now, so I'm just looking at them. But Millie is into gymnastics right now. She's so good at it. And Wesley's just probably the chillest guy I've ever met. Like, nothing really upsets him. He just kind of hangs. So they're awesome. They're a ton of fun. A little bit about me. I am a software engineer now. That's what I do for work, so I'm kind of a nerd, but that's how it goes. But I'm here tonight to talk to you guys about God. I want to think for a second on a concept here. I want to run it by you guys, see what you think as well. See what you think about this statement. What someone does tells you a lot about who they are. Right? What someone does tells you a lot about who they are. The decisions they make maybe can show you how they think. What they prioritize maybe tells you what they care about. What someone does tells you a lot about who they are. I learned this the hard way when I was actually learning to ski. So I'm late to the game with skiing. I started skiing for the first time when I was 22 years old. Maybe some of you in here are skiing since you can walk. No, I was already uncoordinated when I started trying to learn to ski. And so that first year, I went a handful of times to the mountain. I was getting some confidence. And so later in the season, one of my buddies got some cheap lift tickets to A Basin. And it was on April 1st, late in the season. Some of you guys are laughing because you know what's coming here. So my buddy and I, again, we're not very good skiers at all. We're learning still. We go up to the mountain, and this is what we see. Oh, okay. This is like kind of a snapshot. Like, people are wearing crazy clothes, not a lot of shirts. I mean, I was seeing people in banana suits, gorilla suits, dinosaur suits. I'm like, how many different types of suits are there for this? It's like people all over the place. There was a party in the parking lot that was so loud. The music was playing so loud that you could hear it at the top of the first lift clearly. It was wild. The weirdest thing I saw was actually this like ancient old man, no hair, no shirt, huge beard. And he was just skiing, and he had like a handle of Jim Beam tied around his waist, just like dragging it behind him as he's skiing. Like, that should not be allowed. What is going on, right? And so I learned that this was somewhat of a skier's holiday known as Gaper Day. Gaper Day. What the heck's a gaper? Gaper stands for Guaranteed Accident Prone on Every Run. See, this was a holiday for the locals to celebrate, hey, all the tourists are gone. There's only legit skiers on the mountain right now. Well, as you guys know, I'm walking into this as a fairly newbie skier. Some might even say a gaper. So my buddy and I, we were like, okay, don't freak out, just blend in. We're in like normal clothes, normal ski jacket. Don't freak out, just blend in. But it's pretty hard to hide bad skiing. The way you ski shows a lot about what kind of skier you are. So we go up the lift. We go to this first run. It's just a blue. My buddy goes down. It's late in the season. It's icy. He hits a patch of ice, and he falls right below the lift. I'm like, oh, it's the worst place to fall. And so while I'm skiing, I look back up, feeling horrible for my buddy, and I hit a patch of ice. I fall, and it's just a yard sale. Like ski, pole, glove, hat, goggles. And all I can hear is just people yelling from the lift, Gaper! What you do tells a lot about who you are. There's no way I was going to hide that I'm just some guy from Arkansas trying to learn how to ski. Man, what a day. What someone does tells you a lot about who they are. We see this all over the place in like more normal situations, right? Like if you have a friend who's always doing homework, maybe they're doing some CAD, some programming. What's their major? They're an engineer, right? Maybe you have a friend who's always covered in paint. This is my wife in college, always covered in paint on the clothes and the hands. Maybe it's an art major, right? Maybe you have a friend who goes to these networking events, doesn't really go to class. You might find a business major, right? There you go. What someone does tells you a lot about who they are. So tonight, as we consider what our life looks like in the context of our relationship with God, what is it about a Christian or a follower of Christ that tells you they're a follower of Christ? What is it that someone might do that might clue you in to the fact that they follow Jesus? What is it that they do that tells you who they are? Is it the fact they go to church? Is it the things that they talk about? The fact they own a Bible, have a cross necklace, have a verse tattooed on them? What is it about someone that tells you they are a follower of Jesus? What is it that they do? Well, let's take a look at what Jesus says. And just to give a little bit of context, we're about to look in John chapter 13. Jesus, this is towards the end of his life on earth. He spent some time, years, with his disciples. And he's kind of, knowing he's not going to be with them much longer, he's given them some kind of words, some advice, and some thoughts. And in John chapter 13, Jesus says this: "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. And by this, everyone will know that you're my disciples, if you love one another." So according to Jesus, what is it that a follower of Jesus does that tells you they're a follower of Jesus? They love each other. They love one another. Man, how cool is that? And it's interesting that Jesus says a new command here, right? Like I just said, this was towards the end of Jesus' time with his disciples. They'd been with him. They'd heard him teach, and he'd said things like, love your neighbor, love your enemy. Jesus talked a lot about love, but he says here, a new command I give you, love one another. What could that mean? What's new about this command? The next sentence, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. You see, Jesus was saying, the new command is, now that you've seen my life, emulate that in the way that you love others. What the disciples don't totally understand is coming is Jesus is going to say, what you've seen in my death, the fact that I'm going to lay down my life willingly for the sins of the world, that sacrificial type love, man, do that for one another. Man, followers of Jesus love each other sacrificially. They put others first. Pastor theologian Francis Schaeffer says, if we do not show love to one another, the world has the right to question whether Christianity is true. What is it that a follower of Jesus does that tells you to follow Jesus? Well, they love one another. They have good relationships with one another. But it doesn't stop there. You see, this is a cool calling. Like if you're in this room and you say, yeah, I'm following Jesus, you're called to this type of love. If you're someone in the room who's trying to determine, hey, am I about this? Am I going to follow Jesus? This should be something that you're looking for. Man, do followers of Christ really do this? But there's so much more to this idea of friendship and relationship than just a calling. Oops. You see, if you open your Bible to Genesis chapter 1, you're going to immediately hear about how God created everything. It's an amazing story. As God is creating the heavens, the earth, he's separating the earth from the water. He says, let there be light. And by his very words, he speaks into existence the things that we see and interact with today. He says, let there be light. And he sees the light was good. He says, let there be water and land. The water's good. The land's good. He says, I'm going to fill this water with fish. And he says, the fish are good. He says, I'm going to fill this land with animals. The animals are good. He says, I'm going to make a man in my own image. I'm going to create him. This is good. But then God says something different. And it's so different that it's almost like a record scratch when you're reading. It's like, man alone is not good. Man by himself is not good. Genesis 2:18, it's not good that the man should be alone. And what he says next is, I'll make a helper suitable for him. You see, not only are we called by Jesus to love one another and show him to the world, God placed in every single one of us a desire for relationship. Adam, the first man, was in a creation full of good things, in a perfect connection to God, yet he was still lonely. God created him for something deep, a relationship with other people. So we see in the Bible, it's pretty clear that we are called to relationship with one another, not just for our purpose to point others to God, but for our own flourishing as a human being. We are called to be known and loved in relationship. But if you look at our culture today, the current or the flow, if you imagine culture like a river, the flow, the current of culture is to pull us toward loneliness and isolation. So God made us for a relationship. It's our purpose, it's our calling, it's our need. Yet the culture around us seems to pull us into loneliness and isolation. A recent study in 2021 conducted by Harvard found that 61% of adults say they're lonely. 61% of adults say they're lonely. That's everyone in this room is an adult. 61% of us would say, man, I'm lonely. That same Harvard study found that the effects of loneliness actually are worse for you. They exceed the health risks of obesity. Like, you are better off being obese than lonely from a health standpoint. Excessive loneliness is actually equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's a lot of cigarettes. But to be excessively lonely has worse long-term health effects for you than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Studies are even showing that, it impacts the body, that loneliness may cause inflammation, and may even cause harmful changes in DNA expression. God said it is not good for man to be alone, and that is exactly what we are finding through medicine today. There's also two major drops in life expectancy in the last decade, both of them being the largest since the influenza breakout of 1920. In 2017 was the first one, and 2020 was the second. 2020 is maybe a little more obvious. There's a global pandemic that impacted the stats. But in 2017, there was a rise of what experts call deaths of despair. Things like overdoses, suicides, preventable diseases that can be linked to loneliness. And then come 2020, COVID exacerbated all of those problems that already existed. Man, it's not good for man to be alone. We can see that there's a loneliness issue in our culture, but why is that? Why are we so lonely? Well, if we look at our culture, it kind of makes sense. We live in a culture that is exceptionally busy. The things that are expected of us from work, from school, the things that we must do, keep us isolated, make us too busy to connect with others. Other things that impact us, just screens. We live in just a screen-heavy culture where we go to a lot of entertainment on screens. We interact through screens as opposed to face-to-face. Even the idea of social media, which is supposed to connect us, oftentimes has us managing an image where people know a version of us, but they don't really know us. And that's really isolating. That's really lonely. And so this idea of loneliness, it's not something we want to admit, but I would guess there's a good number of us in this room that experience loneliness, even right now. It's not something you want to admit. You're like, man, I have friends, I'm connected, I'm not lonely. But loneliness actually doesn't necessarily have anything to do with being around people. Loneliness doesn't necessarily have anything to do with being around people. Like maybe one of your friends moved away. Man, that could cause loneliness when you had a deep connection with someone and they moved. Maybe you yourself moved. Maybe you just moved to Fort Collins for school and you left a group of friends behind and you're making new ones right now. That can be a little bit lonely. Maybe you've gone through a breakup recently. That can be a lonely time. Maybe no one really knows you. Like, you have friends, but no one knows what you're going through. Maybe you've been through something that you feel like no one else understands. Man, you can be surrounded by people, but that can be a lonely place. God says it's not good for man to be alone. But the good news is, God calls us into a relationship, first and foremost with him, and then subsequently with other believers. And so with our remaining time tonight, I want to look at two ways we can fight against this current of culture, right? Like if the way our culture is set up is to kind of isolate us and leave us alone, man, how can we fight back? What ways does God say from his word that we can fight against that current and pursue relationship? Again, it's our purpose and it's for our flourishing, that we don't experience being lonely, being isolated. So the passage we're going to look at tonight is Hebrews 10:24 through 25. And it says this, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." So I love this passage, and I've actually spent a good bit of time reading through and rereading through Hebrews these last couple months. It's a really cool book. I highly recommend reading it. The writer of Hebrews is anonymous. We don't actually know who it is. But the writer of Hebrews is talking about how Jesus is enough, how he's sufficient, how he is better than old traditions, ways of doing things, that Jesus can connect us to God. That's a main theme. Then the other main theme is, this culture that wants to pull us away from that. Man, how do we stay steadfast? How do we continue following Jesus? And again, the author talks about the importance of relationships with other people in that. And so there's sort of a climax here in this Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 through 25. The author says, "Let us consider how we may spur one on to love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing." And so the first point that I want to look at from this verse tonight is that if we want to fight against the current of culture that's pushing us towards loneliness, the one way that we can fight back is by doing exactly what that second bit says, not giving up meeting together. We can be present. So the first thing that we can do to fight against the flow of culture is be present. I love how the author basically in the verse kind of talks about how it can easily become a habit to not meet together. I don't know about you guys, but I relate with that a ton. When you just get into the flow of life and you have your things that you do, you have your classes you go to, the places you go to do your homework, the times you go to the gym, you can get all these habits and not have meeting with believers or people who can push you to grow, be part of that, right? You can get in the habit of not meeting together. But being present would be the opposite. It's creating habits in your life to make time for that. Never underestimate the power of just being present, just showing up. There's this incredible book out there called Atomic Habits by James Clear. Has anyone read that book? I highly recommend it. Yes, we got a couple in the back. Yes. Atomic Habits by James Clear. This guy's like a genius. He's talking, the premise of the book is like you can make little tiny like atomic adjustments to your life that like pay huge dividends in the future, Atomic Habits. And he tells a story about this guy and how his life changed drastically by just showing up. Basically, this guy was trying to get back in shape, and so he buys a gym membership, and he makes a deal with kind of himself. Like, basically, all I have to do with this gym membership is just go scan into the gym once a day. That's all he had to do. That's all he was holding himself accountable to, is his atomic habit. And so the guy goes to the gym with his gym membership out on his way back from work, walks in his work clothes. Boop. And that was it. That's what the guy did. He went, well, that was easy. Okay, cool, I can do this. The next day, the guy goes to the gym. Boop. I'm here already. I'll just go walk around the track. Does a lap around the track, leaves. Pretty soon, by just booping into the gym once a day, he just got in incredible shape. Because what happened is, okay, I guess I'll bring gym clothes if I'm going to walk into the gym. And the next thing you know, by just showing up, this man's life is transformed as he gets back into shape and takes control back over that portion of his life. The writer of Hebrews knows that there's great power in what your habits are. There can be a lot of power if the habit is not meeting with people. That leads to loneliness. But there can also be a ton of power in just showing up, in just being present. I know that's easier said than done. I was struggling with this literally last night. I got off work late. I was already tired from that. Megan and I went to this class at our church that we're a part of, and then I was supposed to meet with guys from my small group at church. And literally as we were leaving the class, I told Megan, I was like, there's like a 50% chance I go to this thing. I get home, like, I should go. I'm literally thinking about this verse. Don't get in the habit of not doing this. So I show up, and friends, I had one of the most incredible I didn't even bring anything. I just showed up, and these guys are talking about how we can do a better job of loving our neighbors and serving them and sharing the fears that they have associated with that and how they're overcoming those things. And I just showed up, and this happened to me. And I walked away so encouraged, so incredibly built up, feeling heard by these other men and wanting to go now do good in the world. Just because I showed up, and I wasn't going to, right? There's great power in showing up, and I think that's what, in part, the author of Hebrews is talking about. Let us not neglect meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. I think there's two parts to being present. There's two parts to being present. There's a physical aspect and a mental aspect. Let's start with the physical aspect of being present. Self-explanatory. You need to be physically there if you're going to be present with people in community and build relationships. You need to make time for that, right? In the midst of busyness, in the midst of all the things, man, we need to be physically present. But almost more challenging at times can be being mentally present. I think this is also, what we're talking about here in not neglecting meeting together, because you can show up and be physically present but not be clued in mentally. How does that happen? I think phones are a big part of that. How they just cause a distraction. There's a book called Reclaiming Conversation, and one of the studies done in this book was basically they polled a bunch of people, and 88% of the people they polled said that they, when a lull happens in conversation, their habit is to take out their phone and just sort of look at it. You know what I'm talking about, right? People run out of things to say, and you're like, oh, shoot. We've done that. We've all done this, right? 86% of those 88 people, I think I said that right, said that was bad for the conversation. It was bad for the conversation. Why? Because before phones, you'd be talking to your friends, say, yeah, the football game was awesome. Okay, yeah. I better think of something to say. Dude, how about that pizza, right? Yeah, let's keep talking, okay? We miss out on this very human moment. It's a very human moment. No one is too cool for this moment. It's a very human moment when you run out of things to say, and then you think of something else to say, and you start to build relationship. It's incredible. And in this book, they realize that the phone is kind of like this comfort isolation shield where we don't have to engage. Man, if we want to be mentally present, I think there's some habits we could form around our phones in social situations. Along with the normal things, just getting enough sleep when you're super tired because you watch Netflix all night, played video games all night. It's hard to clue in with what people are doing. Being present, not thinking to the next fun thing that's going to happen after this, but being present in the moment is a discipline. We don't want to neglect meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but we want to encourage one another. In order to do that, we must be present, physically, mentally. So that is point number one. To fight against the current of culture, we got to be present. Let's look at what our second point could be. Oops. Spoiler alert. Dang, I don't know how to use this thing. Okay, pretend you didn't see that. We're looking at Hebrews 10, 24 through 25 again. He says, and let us consider, he used some strong language, okay? Follow with me. Let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. That's some strong language. So what does consider mean to you? Think about that. Consider, being thoughtful, giving something time, giving it my opinion, my thoughts, my energy. Consider, okay, how we may spur one another on. What does it mean to spur? Got any cowboys in the room? Spur are those clangly, jingly things on the bottom of boots, right? that the cowboy jams into the horse's side to get it to run faster. You know what I'm talking about? Spurs, right? It's like when they walk in the saloon, it's like the chick. Huh. Spur one another on. So let us put some thought towards how we might jam metal in each other's sides. No, that's not what he's saying. But I think he's saying something equally as intrusive. I think he's saying something equally as intrusive. I think what the author is saying is we need to spend time thinking about how we can enter someone's life and allow others to enter our lives and let them talk about some of the hard things that are going on and push us towards God in the midst of that. I think that is intrusive. It's maybe uncomfortable. But if we want to avoid isolation and loneliness, we can't only show up, although it's important, we have to allow people into our life in that way. We have to let people who we trust are following Jesus to intrude, to push us towards God. In other words, we have to be real. We've got to be present, but we also have to be real. Does anyone know who this is? I'd be surprised. This is a guy named Shoeless Joe Jackson. The dude played baseball in the early 1900s. I didn't even know they played baseball that early in history. I'm like, were there still like horses and chariots? Like 1900s, that's so long ago. They played baseball though, believe it or not. Shoeless Joe Jackson. There's this show called Pawn Stars. Maybe you guys have heard about it. Pawn Stars, kind of an edgy name. It's kind of, I love these shows, like American Pickers, Pawn Stars, like History Channel shows. There's like these whole category, right? The premise of the Pawn Stars show is these guys have a pawn shop in Vegas, and they buy up stuff all the time. The whole premise is like people bring in their junk. The guys decide, okay, is this worth anything? Is this worth enough for me to put money down, then turn and resell? It's a fascinating show. So a guy comes into the pawn shop with a signed book that's allegedly signed by Shoeless Joe Jackson. This guy's apparently a big deal. I didn't know who he was before this. Baseball player 1900s, book signed by him. The pawn shop guy knows that this is like there's a buyer for this type of product, I guess, whatever you call it, this type of collectible. And he decides to buy the signed book for $13,000. It's like half a Honda Civic. $13,000 for a signed book, an old book, right? So the pawn shop guys, they take it to their expert. He looks at the signature and face palms. Why? Because it is not only not his actual signature, but it's a laughably bad version of the signature. How much do you think that old book is with some ink on it, like normally? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You probably couldn't get someone to take that for free. It's just an old book. That's one of the biggest losses on the show. The dude lost $13,000. Why? Because the value is in the authenticity. Values in the authenticity, right? If it's not real, not valuable. Similarly, when we meet together in friendship and fellowship, oftentimes the value is in the authenticity. The value is in whether we're going to show up and be real. You can't be spurred on by others if no one knows what's going on. I know the times that I've grown most in my life have been when I've had these type of relationships, when people really know what's going on in my life. Like the group I was at last night. I'm so thankful for them. Those guys know what's going on in my life, and I'm so encouraged and spurred on. For me, the first time I really experienced this was in college. I came in my freshman year. I wasn't following Jesus yet. I met some guys who were involved with StuMo who really pointed me towards God. And that did huge things for my life. But as they got to know me, as I got to let them know what I was really struggling with, I saw victories over some of the darkest areas of my life as a result of being known and encouraged by people who first loved Jesus and then loved me. I mean, I grew and developed so much as a person, as a leader. It's amazing. So many of the things that we face in life that give us so much anxiety don't give us anxiety because the thing is necessarily hard, but because we're facing it alone. And there's so much power when you have people who really know you because you've been real, you've taken the risk. Man, there's a level of confidence that God designed us to get from that. It's incredible.
And then basic training in tech school, and then COVID lockdown, and then back to school, and then getting deployed, and then finally back to college where I am now. During that time, the space in my heart was being carved larger and larger as my faith was not the focus of my life. I wanted connections so bad because I kept finding myself looking for friend groups and clubs and activities or whatever it may have been during that time to find that acceptance that I was so desperate for. I would wake up and clean the house from the night before with a grueling headache. A lot of us can probably relate to those situations. It was repetitive, and it left me with three things. I felt selfish. I was chasing after my own worldly desires, and that failed me every time. I felt unsatisfied. And the third one is that I felt like a fraud. I would put on the fake smile and talk about the funny memories from the night before when I was actually masking all the pain that was consuming me on the inside. This led to me getting plugged into this thing called StuMo. I would slowly start coming more and more as I was still fighting my own battles. Raise your hand if you were at the Kaleo this summer. A whole bunch of hands up, right? So these are amazing people that I got to love and truly got to talk to and open myself up to with this summer. First time in a long time that I got to have that intentionality. As we mentioned this verse before with Hebrews 10:24, it says, let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, right? Now raise your hand if you're in ROTC. Got a little clan over here. These are the amazing people who have got to meet with and continue meeting with as we spur one another on towards those love and good deeds. I've found so much fruit and life through this. But no, I haven't made it yet. I've made great strides in all of these different transitions, and I got to walk closely with the Lord, but I haven't made it yet. Life is still hard, but centering yourself with these healthy relationships and fellowship is something that makes a huge difference in your life, like it did mine. And that leads me to my final point. If anyone in this room has dealt with anything similar and is still reaching for a group that I was so desperate for so long, please come find me afterwards. I want to connect with you, pray for you, and share all my amazing friends with you. As much as I love them, they're not all perfect angels, except for Chris Dutzar right there. But we all have our own stories. We want to hear your story, and we want to connect with you. And we want to extend our love and welcome anyone who may be feeling this loneliness and looking for someone to grab the hand of as we walk in the light of Jesus together. Thank you. God bless.
So we fight against the current of culture by being present, being real. Side note on being real, I wanted to make sure I shared this as well. I know that being real can be extremely hard. Like, there are all sorts of obstacles to really sharing what's going on. I'm sure you guys have experienced, as I have. You know, this idea of like, okay, if I really share what's going on, will I be taken seriously? Like, maybe a group of friends are kind of jokesters. It's like, are they just going to laugh this off? Or maybe you feel something like, man, if they really knew what was going on, I would be judged, or maybe I'd be too much, and they wouldn't want to hang out with me. I would encourage you, there's sort of two sides of this coin. One, that it is a risk, but vulnerability is worth it with the right, trustworthy people. And then if you are someone that someone shares something really difficult with, to be a good listener and receiver of that. Man, that's hard. Let me pray for you. Man, I can't imagine what you're going through. Thank you so much for telling me. Man, these are great ways to sort of facilitate that. And unlike being present, being real, there's not always the best time for that, right? Like, sometimes it's a really good time to go deep and have conversation, but if every time you meet together just really talking about these really deep things, that could be exhausting for both people. So there's some balance to learn with this, but I encourage you, it is so worth it. If you are feeling like you need to share something with someone, find someone you trust and just do it. Just don't worry about the timing. Don't worry about any of that stuff. Just go for it, because God wants you to be fully known and fully loved, first by Him and then by others as well. Man, if we're going to be people who move against the flow of culture, to get away from loneliness and isolation, we must meet together. We must invest in friendships. We must be present. We must be real. Can you guys imagine? Like Jesus said, my followers will be known by the way they love one another. What if StuMo here at CSU was known by the way that you all loved each other and loved new people? What would this group be like? It would be amazing. It would be an amazing thing to be a part of. It would be an amazing thing that people want to join. I encourage you guys to think on that. How can this group be more like that, like Jesus calls us to be? Let me pray for us. God, I thank you so much, Lord, that you are a good God. Lord, that you made us for relationship. God, that you invite us through your Son into relationship with you. God, I pray for every person in this room, Lord, that you would just give us wisdom and boldness to be present and to be real, to figure out what patterns in our lives we maybe need to change so we can be more present, both physically and mentally. And God, I pray that you would give us boldness and the right people to connect with, that we can open up to what is really going on, that we might receive encouragement and spurring on so that we can be a better person, a better leader, and more connected to you. God, I thank you so much for this group. All these things in your name. Amen.